The year is 2014. The worst thing people had to fear was the occasional stolen tank rampage or gas station robbery spree. The memories seemed fuzzier, people somehow seemed friendlier, and having $1 million in the bank was impressive. One of the most common ways of showing off that you no longer associated with the commoners was by flaunting a supercar in that 6 to 7 figure range. Those who could afford to tear through the mean streets of Los Santos were given 3 options. The Entity XF, an all-around crowd pleaser, the Cheetah, a car that was obscured tragically on arrival, and of course, the one that everybody knows. Until one day, everything changed. The wealthiest people you knew were suddenly trading in their adders and entities like Halloween candy. Typically, a supercar breaks the mold by revolutionizing the engine, mastering the art of airflow, removing the roof, or when all else fails, making everything out of carbon fiber. And that's exactly what Pegassi did. They took everything you thought you knew about the Vodka and stripped it to the bone, literally stitching it back together fiber by fiber. Most of it was co-developed by an aircraft company, and the forged carbon monocoque chassis was developed by the same people who make the sticks for the world's slowest sport. It makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Flying around the state to avoid traffic and teeing off after a long day of yoga is a definitive multimillionaire lifestyle. The Zentorno was grown from a lab to be more carbon-based than its occupants. This kind of unorthodox upbringing tended to make the Zentorno the black sheep of the Pegassi family. Sort of like your uncle at Thanksgiving dinner who drops political takes hotter than napalm.
All I'm saying is there isn't a White History Month, is there?
Uncle Mark.
I'll tell you what, I feel bad for your generation. The whole country's going to shit because people get too offended, and now all the food mascots don't even look sexy anymore.
Uncle Mark, please, the food's getting cold.
The deep state matrix wants to keep us from drinking our coffee, eating our meat, and using gas stoves so their 5G rays can penetrate our brain waves. No, I'm good. I'll stick to the non-alcoholic stuff. Can't start my car otherwise.
By the end of the 2000s, Pegassi saw the writing on the walls. The Reaper was far from ready, the Infernus was aging rapidly, and the Vodka was considered the poor man's Pegassi. Worse yet, the massive displacement behind the Adder and the XF left Pegassi at the kids' table. If it wanted attention, it would have to compete with the big boys some other way. Pegassi didn't have Grottie's dedicated buy anything we make customers, nor the royal wealth of Overflot. In fact, Pegassi was orphaned at least once a decade by each starry-eyed and ill-fated company that thought their ownership would somehow go differently. This time around, Pegassi was living off Obey's allowance money, so it had to be very careful about how it spent it. Meet the Zentorno. What does it mean? Nobody knows, but it sounds Italian, so it must be fast. While most authentic Pegassis have the trademark rear visibility of a keyhole, the Zentorno breaks tradition by removing the rear window altogether and replacing it with a carbon fiber blindfold. This allowed the designers to get crazy with the unique hexagonal clad rear engine cover, denoting the cylinder count of Pegassi's infamous V12 party trick. The large engine ensures that even your footprint is made of as much carbon as possible. To get that gut-shuddering head start, the engine is coupled to an all-wheel drivetrain with a balance of 30 to the front and 70 to the rear. Sort of like something else. While everybody but the environmentalists can agree that the Zentorno is a winning formula from a technological standpoint, the presentation is subject to debate. Take the Zentorno's grille, for instance. Some think this carbon fiber cheese grater looks a bit on the tacky side, while some would suggest it gives the Zentorno an aggressive accent of character. The only thing that both parties can agree on is that the lack of symmetry on some versions of this car is a clear indication that God is either dead or blind to those he created. Sorry, you don't have to see it forever too. After lifting the car's massive scissor doors above your head, you'll find that the interior tub of forged carbon and ultra-lightweight materials is nowhere to be found. Instead, there lies a propylene dash with carbon fiber panels bolted to it. Turns out this new forged carbon stuff was a bit on the expensive side, so for mass production they decided to use the automotive equivalent of custom video game console faceplate swaps. Classy. As far as everything else goes, you have your essentials: 5 separate oil gauges, 2 gauges for your battery, and a gauge to measure torque. Instead of air conditioning and space to store your stuff, you have an instrument panel for testing and tweaking your car's calibration. Every angle you look at has been embroidered with logos, proudly reminding you that you've paid the price of a small bungalow for a car. From bumper to bumper, this car has a lot going on. From the triangular air intakes to the grille that looks like somebody dropped a bunch of toothpicks. The back is a total war zone of vents, angles, and jagged edges. Do so much as look at this thing the wrong way, and it'll cut you. By contrast, the car's side profile is much cleaner, with accent lines forming into mirror mounts and concealed body vents. Whether or not the Zentorno needs this much ventilation or there were too many cooks in the kitchen is anyone's guess. Meanwhile, the supercar handles beautifully, even for today's standards, taking turns with grace and straightaways with haste, like any purpose-built race car that will never ever see a track. Speaking of which, they might have made a teensy-weensy mistake in forgetting to include reverse lights. However the Italians managed to get this one behind the regulators is impressive. While the Zentorno is a rare sight by today's standards, you'll find people who swear by this machine, with a mixture of nostalgia and fondness. And of course you'll face those who detest this car's very existence. Like it or not, the Zentorno was a big deal, culturally and technologically. When most manufacturers were still experimenting with the rigidity and structural integrity of the woven composite, Pegassi was printing money with the stuff.